it's an instinct.
Right, and they're seeking out more information, and
Yes.
in so doing, you're giving permission to the other person to share more and take more space and time, which allows people to disclose more.
Yeah.
Beyond asking more questions, are there other things that consistent super communicators do that others don't as
Yeah,
much?
there's a number of things. One of them is that they tend to ask a certain kind of question, which Nicholas Epley at University of Chicago has written really beautifully about this. They ask deep questions, and so a deep question is something that asks me about my values, my beliefs, or my experiences. And what's interesting is that deep questions don't often seem deep. So, for instance, if you meet someone and you say like, what do you do for a living? I'm a doctor. Oh, did you always want to be a doctor? Like, when did you decide to go to medical school? Were your parents doctors? Those are three deep questions because the way that someone replies to them is going to inevitably tell you something about how they see themselves, what happened in their lives, the values that led them to medicine. And we're learning something about them.
I think that's wonderful. And question asking is really liberating. And the nice thing about it is you can actually stockpile or think in advance about some types of questions that you might want to ask. Not that you script them out, but there's work you can do in advance. And even though it sounds counterintuitive, in these spontaneous interactions, you can actually prepare to be spontaneous.
Absolutely.
And
And actually, you can script them out, right? The Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard Business School did this wonderful study where she had people talk to strangers and write down 3 topics they wanted to discuss before the conversation. And then it took like 7 to 10 seconds. And then people would put the card in their back pocket. And she found that very, very few of them actually spoke about the things they had written down, but almost all of them felt less anxious during the conversation because they knew that they had this thing in their back pocket. And so having a couple of questions up your sleeve, and some of them can be as simple. I mean, at the end of the day, most deep questions are a version on, what did you make of that? And sometimes you can just ask. Someone says, I went to medical school. Oh yeah, what did you make of that? What was that like?
yeah.
That's all it takes.
Right, absolutely. My mother-in-law, who I've talked about before on this podcast, it was a black belt in small talk, and her 3 magic words were "tell me more."
Yeah.
And it gives permission. You dedicate a lot of time in the book talking about conflictual communication, and maybe that comes from the situation you had with your wife that you shared. But what best practices do you suggest to help us communicate better when we're in conflict?